Welcome back to HANA Basics for Developers. Now what we're going to do is, from this point, we're going to change things up a little bit. Up until this point in the series, I've used a combination of slides and a few demos in the system to help explain architectural concepts. Now we want to begin developing. And what I decided to do was take the exercises from the most recent openSAP course and basically do them on video and walk through them. Normally, the exercises are published with the openSAP course, but we don't record someone doing them all. Even in the course themselves, we talk about the concepts and we do some demos, but we publish an exercise document where you can, on your own, do all the exercises. What I've decided to do here is do each exercise on video, explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it, and really use that as a learning tool, assuming that you're totally new to the topic, you haven't seen the tooling before other than in the second video, and you're not totally comfortable maybe with all of the concepts yet, and use the exercises themselves as the jumping off point to expand on these different concepts. So I'll be going beyond even what the exercises themselves do, often to explain the underlying concepts and architecture that we're utilizing in each exercise. And I'm going to start here with the Hello World exercise. It kind of puts us back up at the application server level. We're going to start at the end of this exercise. We're going to have a little HTML5 Hello World web page. I start here for a couple reasons. One, we want to just get our project created in the Web IDE. We want to get comfortable with the Web IDE environment. The other thing that I like to do here, with the Hello World, it's a nice way to test to make sure that our security is set up right. And I just find that it's easier if you do make a mistake setting up the security. It's easier to find it right away before we develop a lot of other stuff, and then midway through the project find out that, oh no, I'm getting not authorized. Why am I getting not authorized? It's just much easier to troubleshoot at this point. Now you might be saying, yeah, but I'm not an application server developer. I really only want to learn about stored procedures or calculation views, stuff like that. Now don't worry, after we do our little Hello World and we have our project set up and our security set up right, we're going to go right into database development. And that's actually what we're going to spend a whole lot of time on in subsequent videos. But I think this is an important item, even if you don't plan to do application server level development. Once again, having some of the knowledge of the basics and, making sure that you understand the project structure and things like that. And launch the SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA. And once again, if you need a little introduction to the development tools, the SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA, the delta between using the HANA Studio and using the SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA, I'd refer you back to video number 2 in this series where we went through that. So I'm not going to start with all the basics of navigation, stuff like that. We did a bit of that already. But here's what a typical user would see when they launch the SAP Web IDE. I have my workspace, but it's empty. There's nowhere that I go to browse all the existing projects, not in the Web IDE at least. All our content is in Git. But what we're going to do here, the scenario that we're going to do is we're going to build a complete end-to-end application using HANA native development, and it'll be a full stack application, meaning we're going to create the database artifacts, the service enablement, and the user interface, all within the Web IDE and all running on SAP HANA. So we're going to use the full range of capabilities. And once again, even if you're only interested in one part or the other, I think it's good to see the total end-to-end. Even if you're only interested in doing database development, bear with us. There isn't that much application server development stuff here at the beginning, but it's good to be familiar with the environment. Now what I want to do here is I want to begin by creating a new application. Okay. Now, many times as a developer, you're probably going to be editing somebody else's code. We showed the other day how you can clone a project from Git, and you would go over to Git to find the project. We're going to go with the assumption that this is a complete greenfield application. Nothing exists currently, and we're going to create it from scratch. The other thing that we're going to do a little bit later is we're going to create a data model within our application. We're going to create our own tables locally. But of course, many of you creating HANA native applications will probably, you might be creating some of your own tables, but chances are good you're going to consume already existing tables as part of a standard application like ERP or CRM or BW. So we will also show you how to do that. So bear with me. In the beginning here, we're going to show you the full range of capabilities, even if some of this is maybe not what you do all the time. It's important to know that it's possible and how you do it, and that's why we're going to show you the full range here. So I'm going to create a new project, and this is the latest available version of the Web IDE for HANA 2.0 SPS 03. It's backwards compatible, so you can use the latest version of the Web IDE even on older versions of HANA. But this latest version does have several wizards to choose from, project wizards. Used to be we just had the multi-target application. Multi-target application being or MTA, basically just meaning we can have multiple modules made up of different runtimes. We can have Node, we can have Java, we can have HANA database development, we can have SAP UI5 and Fiori. And then what we see here is two specialized versions of the MTA. We have a HANA database application. It's going to still create an MTA, but it's automatically going to create one module in your project that is a HANA database module and do some of the setup for you. So if you are only doing calculation views and stored procedures, you probably want to choose this option. But if you're going to build a full stack application and include business logic and user interface as well, then you want a full multi-target, and you'll add your own modules. Or the third choice, this is a new option that we have, is to build a SAP Cloud Platform business application. Now you might think well, I'm in the on-premise world. Why would I choose SAP Cloud Platform? That's just the name of the programming model that we're going to use. And it's the same programming model that's available in the cloud and in the on-premise world. And really, if you want to know more about the SAP Cloud Platform programming model, its positioning, and its value proposition, everything, that is covered in the latest openSAP course, the newest one, the HANA 7 course that's coming out here in January 2019. So I'm not going to repeat all of the positioning of that. That's all new material, just recently released. But we are going to use that here. So maybe you're watching this video in conjunction with the new openSAP course. That's good. But like I said, we're going to cover the basics, but we're going to do it in the context of the latest available technology. So that's why I'm going to choose this. Now I got to give project name here. And I am following along with the exercise document on my other screen. If you wonder why I'm looking over at the side here sometimes, I want to make sure that I don't miss a step as I go through the exercises. So we'll call it openSAP. And in this wizard, we see that, yes, it's going to create a HANA database module for us. We do want it to do that. We have our choice of our services, our OData services, either being implemented in Java or Node.js or not having any at all. We know that later we're going to use Node.js as our technology, JavaScript. We'll come to that much later in the series, but for now we'll go ahead and choose that in the wizard. We could of course always add it manually later. There's nothing that the wizard really does that we can't do manually, but it's nice to go ahead and have things set up for us. And then we have to choose a space. We only have the one to choose from in my system, the development space. So spaces in the XSA world are a way that we can separate development, different groups of developers. Maybe you want to separate your, maybe your HR developers, you want their development to be private and not all your other developers to be able to see them. it's also the way that we can connect a single XSA instance to multiple HANA database tenants in an MDC scenario. Each tenant would have its own space. Now, I have an MDC system, but I only have a single tenant, and I'm the only developer on the system. It's private to me, so I just have a single space called development. That's probably pretty typical of most people when they start. You know, maybe a larger corporation would have multiple spaces for various scenarios as I described. So we'll go ahead and finish the wizard, and this will generate the skeleton of the project for me. Go, and we can expand this, and we can see inside a project what we end up with is multiple modules. That's what we call these little subfolders, subparts of the project. And at any time we can add additional modules to our project, and you see the range of modules that we have to choose from, like HTML5 and list report. That's a Fiori template, Fiori Launchpad, database module, UI5 Java module. This is how, remember in the last video I showed you the HANA cockpit and how, although it's a single application to the end user, when we look at it technically behind the scenes, it's made up of many different application services. Well, those application services at design time, when we're building them in the Web IDE, are simply called modules. So what the wizard has already generated for me is a database module. That's going to be my HANA database artifacts, and it has generated a service module that will ultimately be my Node.js OData services and other application server logic that we have there. And really what we see here is a couple folders in the root. Now, package.json, this is a little bit more of an advanced topic that we'll come back to later, but package.json is the way that we configure Node.js based development, and we can refer to external dependencies, other libraries. They're actually called modules as well. I know that's maybe a little confusing at first. In Node.js, the reusable libraries are called modules. The Web IDE calls each subservice in your application project a module. They're two completely different things. It's just an overloaded term. But what our project wizard did is create a package JSON in the root of our project, and this is where it loads the CDS libraries. CDS, core data and services, it's no longer contained in the C code of the HANA database itself. It's now been written in Node.js, and we pull it in as an external dependency. So the version of CDS we can set here, and actually I'm going to override what the wizard generated. I want a slightly newer version. I'm going to force it into version 2.10. This little caret means that we can actually take a newer version, but only in this most minor position. So this would actually load at runtime 2.13 would be our 2.10.3. And I know that because I looked at what the latest is available. We're saying we'll take minor patches, but not major different versions. And so it's locking us into a particular version, but we can still pick up some patches. We'll come back to the concept of package JSON. That's not too much for you to worry about right now. I just need to really set that so that when I do some building that things work okay. The other thing that I want to show you here is the Mta Yaml file. Now, the Mta Yaml is a very important file. It is basically the heart and soul of our project. It keeps track of all the modules and all of the resources in our project, and most importantly, it allows us as developers to define the relationships between the objects, the dependencies. For instance, it's already generated a HANA database resource, and this HANA database resource, that's our connection to the HANA database, and over here in the database module, we see that it requires the this resource. So we've created this this connection, this relationship between these two parts. Now we'll talk about more of this as we go into the other exercises. For now, we can kind of just rely on the fact that the wizard has done its work and most everything is okay there. Now one thing I want to do is I've got this newly created project. And when I change something and I hit save, if I were to come here to the Mta Yaml file and I would change something, maybe just change the description, demo, and I save, yes, the content is persisted. It's actually persisted on the file system of the XS application server, not in the HANA database. But that's not really considered the permanent persistence of our project. The only thing that provides permanent persistence is Git. So we'd really recommend that right away, even, I've just created the project and ran the wizard, I haven't done any development, I'm really going to connect this up to Git immediately. So what I want to do here is I want to right mouse click, and when I say Git Initialize Local Repository. Okay, and now I have the option, I could set a remote repository and connect it up to an external Git, or I can use basically a little local embedded Git inside of the web IDE, and that's what I'm going to use to start off here. I'm not even going to connect it to an external Git, but I am going to go ahead and do an initial commit and commit that to Git. And now I'm going to, I have a little bit more permanent persistence of the content, and I've got some version management. Now for really good persistence, I would want to connect this to an external Git repository as well. I'd want to set a remote branch for this project and connect it up to, like in my case, the first video I was using github.com. I could connect it up to that if I wanted to. For now, I'm going to go with just the local commit there. Now, after I've done that, the wizard created a database module and a Node.js service. We want to start with a hello world, so I'm actually going to create a new basic HTML5 module. This will give us a web server as part of our application. It will also give us access to the SAP UI5 libraries, and the ability to create SAP UI5 or Fiori applications that can consume our services and really allow us to create an end-to-end application. Now I'm going to give it a pretty straightforward name here of web, and then say finish. And once again, the wizard there has done a lot of work. It's created the module, it's added it to our Mta YAML. We don't have to worry about coming in here and adding anything manually. The wizard did that for us. So that's all in pretty good shape there. The only thing that we want to do is we want to add security right away. Now I know a lot of educational materials, maybe we would kind of skip the security parts and maybe make everything anonymous. That certainly makes the exercises easier, but it's not as realistic. And I like to use as realistic a scenario as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and create a resource. And I'm group 00. I'm going to go ahead and create a resource for the user authentication and authorization service. And this is what is going to enable us to have security on our application. And I have to come here and choose the type. So it is a UAA service. And then I can add a parameter here. That's just one parameter. It is type path. And then this is going to be ./XS security JSON. Okay, and this is just a configuration file where we can supply additional configuration to choose how we want to configure our security in our application. Now that I have added this resource, I need to refresh the editor. You can do that just by switching between the code view and the MTA back to the form-based editor. And now I can come back to the web module and I can add a require statement of, and add that UAA resource to my module. So that's going to, what we've done is a resource is like connecting to some reusable service like the HANA database or like the UAA service. And then if we want a particular application module, in this case our web server, to use that resource, we add it as a require statement. So now automatically our website that we're creating here in our project is going to have security attached to it because we've connected those two things. All right, so it asks us at least for our username and password. Now the other thing that we want to do while we're here in the Mta YAML is I don't like these long module names. The wizard generated them and it just is kind of messy. I want shorter names, so I'm actually going to shorten this to just DB and just SRV, just to make the exercise process a little easier. Nothing that says that you can't have the long name. I just, for the educational purposes, I like the shorter name. It makes it easier as we're learning to figure out what we're working on. Now, the next thing we want to do is that excess security JSON that we referenced here in our UAA resource. We need to create it now inside our project. So let's come here and let's add a file to the root of our project, because that's where we said we were going to find the excess security JSON. And excess security JSON. And it's created a little empty file for us. And what we have here is I don't want to type all this, so we have prepared code snippets. If you're doing these exercises as well, I encourage you to cut and paste it from the code snippets when possible. So I'm just going to navigate here real quick to our code snippets. And this is exercise 1 and 1A. And we'll just cut and paste all this content. You don't want to watch me type this. And I have to change this value to my group number. And what we are doing here is we're really defining the possible security. We're creating the security blueprint, if you will, for our application. If we think of this as like building a house, this is the blueprint. This is the architectural diagram that everyone else will build off of. And we're defining the possible security, the possible actions called scopes that someone might do. There might be a display mode, a create mode, an edit, a delete mode in our application. And we're defining different business attributes that we might want to narrow and filter our security off of, like what country the user belongs to. And we're defining different role templates. Now, that doesn't create the role themselves. That's still the job of the security admin to physically create the role. But what we see here is that we're like predefining them, and then a security admin will come along and create the role, and then of course we have to add logic to our code to also check for these certain things as well. But this is the starting point for all of our security. Now we want to export this file because we actually want to keep it on our local machine, keep it handy. And I'm just going to put it here where I'm recording my videos, keep it handy. And now that I have a copy of that locally, we need to go over to the admin tools because we're going to play the role of the security admin as well for just a minute here. Because we're going to switch over here because I need to create an instance of this resource. The Web IDE can create instances of many of the resources, but not all the types. And the UAA is one that has to be created manually currently in the admin tools. So we're going to switch over here and we're going to drill into where we are working in the development space. And then I'm going to come to the service marketplace, and this shows all the possible service types that we have in the system. We have HANA services, we have audit logging, UAA, SAP UI5, portal services. We'll use a lot of these later. For now, we just want to create our security, so we're going to go into the UAA service, and then we're going to come to instances, and there's some already out there, one in fact, but I'm going to create a new instance for this application that I'm creating. I'm going to tell it that I want it to be space specific, And then I need to load the configuration. Well, we're going to take that configuration file that we as developers defined. We load it in here, and then that's going to use that blueprint to also generate the security on the admin security side that matches up to what our project is going to specify as well. So we'll say next, and we have to give it a name. You make sure we give it the same name that we used in the Web IDE. So actually, I'll come back over here and cheat and cut and paste the name. Make sure that I don't make any mistakes. There we are. And we'll say finish. And it is creating that instance. There it is. It's done. Now I can go back to the Web IDE. One last thing we need to do inside our web module. It also has a configuration file that controls the setup of the web server for our application itself. It is in this xsapp.json file. And there isn't a whole lot we want to do here other than we turn security on. We attached a security resource, so we don't want it to be authentication mode none. We want to change it to route. And then it's going to use the security that we defined in the XS security JSON. In the very beginning here, we're going to keep it pretty simple, and we're just going to use the UAA to make sure that it's an authenticated user, that if you tried to access it without putting a username and password, you get an error message. But eventually, we will add more robust security to actually check the operation. You know, is this a GET? Well, then it's a display, and actually take all these scopes and map them to different HTTP operations that will be checked automatically by the web server. But for now, we're pretty much done here, and we're looking good. Let's go ahead and run our web module. Now, this is going to take a couple seconds, maybe a minute or even two, depending upon the speed of your system. I'm running on my local laptop, so it's not the most powerful system in the world. It could take a little bit to start. But remember, the reason that this takes a little while to start up is because we're actually deploying, in this case, a Node.js runtime, because that's what our web server runs in. And we're bringing down all the SAP supplied libraries that make up this web module. Basically, the application router is what we call it. We're setting up actually a little web dispatcher inside of there, and then we're deploying our content. And this is going to create actually a pretty big folder structure on the file system. Each module that we run becomes its own folder on the file system, and all these files, the runtime, the Node.js runtime, all the supplied libraries, all get copied in there. And then it has to start the service. And we saw that in the previous video. Each individual service is its own process at the operating system level. So that's why it takes a little bit to start up. But once it does start, then it goes ahead and opens another tab so we can test it right away. Basically, we're just mapping to our service. We can see here that it's generated a service, and it's just taking our project name and adding a little bit of junk on the front of it to keep it unique. That way, if two developers create or edit the same project at the same time, they don't overwrite each other. We can each test individually. We have our own private sandboxed instance of this little web server. It has started successfully, and here it popped up. Now, because our credentials are still cached in the web browser, it didn't ask us for a username and password, but I could, for instance, here go into incognito mode and put in the same thing, and then look, it asked me for my username and password. If we had left it without an attached UAA, then it would have been a completely anonymous website, and anyone would be able to hit it even without a username and password. But right now, that's the only security that we've really set up. My user doesn't need any special roles because there's no other deeper level security, but we'll add that to the project over time. Okay, so at this point, we really just have the skeleton of our project in place. We've ran our little hello world. That's really just to get our project framework set up, make sure our security is good, our Mta Yaml is formatted well, we haven't messed anything up, it's running. we're really ready to now start for real with some database development, and we'll pick that up in the next video in this series.